Hey everybody, I'm Greg Sowell, and this is Why Am I, a podcast where I get to talk to interesting people and try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest this go-around is Ron Blatchley. He's something of a local celebrity here in College Station, as he was once the Director of Student Affairs at Texas A&M University, which is a big deal here, and also he was the mayor of Bryan for a handful of years. He then went on to own and operate about 13 McDonalds. The man has never met a stranger. He is extremely friendly, and by all accounts, dude's got it made, right? What you don't know is that he had an extremely traumatic childhood, growing up dirt poor with basically no support system whatsoever. He spent a lifetime making sure he never feels that way again. Man, I 100% can relate to that. Maybe the next time you say hi to Ron, it will remind you that we are all in fighting, invisible things, an invisible battle against the wrongs that have been done to us, trying to undo that stuff. Anyway, this is my first in-person interview, which was exciting. So let me know what you think. How would you see me adjust it? And if you enjoy this or any of the other episodes, please share them. Ron Blatchley, thank you for joining me on the Why Am I podcast.
Hey, I'm excited about it. I don't know what to expect, but hey, I'm game.
All right, excellent. All right, so I need to concoct a scenario, and I'm assuming I am in real life. I travel for business, which I actually do, and I'm here in town, and I'm looking for a pickleball game. The courts are jammed because all the fair weather friends are out. The weather's beautiful. And you are the friendliest guy I see at the court, so we strike up a conversation, and I talk about me for a second. Of course, we exhaust that pretty quick because I don't have a lot going on. But it's your turn to reciprocate. So, who are you?
Hey, I'm just a plain old guy, retired, short, maybe a little too heavy set, but very competitive, and enjoy people immensely.
So competitive. Why do you describe yourself as competitive?
Well, I've always been that way. I've always been shorter than most, and that makes you a little more competitive than most. I can remember in high school when I was shorter than everybody and I wanted to play football, I had to be extra competitive in order to get on the team, in order to even get to play. So from that point on, I've always been real competitive, and I don't do anything halfway. I may not be good at it, but it won't be because I didn't try as hard as I could and give it everything I've got. 110, maybe 120%.
So do you think that's born out of being, you say you're short. How tall are you? Ron?
5'8".
5'8". That's almost average.
Almost, but you look around today, there's no 5'8" people. Seems like my gosh, the young people have gotten so big and tall, and I'm intimidated by all that. But hey, at 80 years old, you don't, you can't do anything about it. So you just got to live with it.
So you are definitely trying 110%.Here did that come from? Like the idea to push so hard?
Well, as we get into my upbringing, I think you'll understand why more when we get into talking about my life, my lifestyle, my occupations, and all that I've done, be it good or bad. I think it'll give you a better picture of why I'm as competitive as I am.
All right, well, take me back to even littler Ron Blatchley. And
okay, well, I'm going to start with, if you don't mind, I'll tell you from the beginning, at least from what I can remember. I was born in St. Helena, California. I'm one of 15 brothers and sisters. Wow. Interestingly enough, my father was working at Mare Island in the San Francisco Bay when we moved from Pennsylvania to California. I was not born when we moved, but I was born after we moved there. And he worked about 150 miles from the town, St. Helena, California. St. Helena is incidentally in the Napa Valley, right in wine country. Back then it was more fruit country, but wine country. And to be honest with you, I mentioned that I had 15 brothers and sisters. I have 3 that are stepbrothers and sisters, 2 stepbrothers and a stepsister, but the other 12 are all flesh and blood. Now, I should explain that when I came about, my mother was working in a bar restaurant and she had an affair with an Italian guy. And I'm a product of that affair. I didn't learn that until much later in life. But it made me a little different than the rest of my brothers and sisters. And that's how I discovered that what is the difference? My family was pretty poor, I would say, uneducated, probably what you would consider from the wrong sides of the tracks. And yet I didn't have that same ambition. My ambition was much greater than what I saw in my family. And I attribute that maybe more to my real father than to anything else, to be honest with you, because the rest of my brothers and sisters are not real ambitious. They've never been educated. They are still, many of them are still on welfare, as we were much of the time when I was growing up. My father would work at a job for as long as it took to get his unemployment, and then he'd be off and get his unemployment. We were very poor and very, just a crazy kind of family. So regardless, interestingly enough, as we grew up and later in life, I got a call one day from one of my sisters and said, Ron, you're going to get a call from a lady by the name of Cynthia. So really, who is she? She's your sister. What? I didn't grow up with her. I know it, but we finally found her. I said, what are you talking about? Well, my older sister, my 2 older sisters than I, who lived in the same house with me, finally came to a point where one of the sisters got on the computer and found out that, yes, in fact, they did remember when they were young kids, we had 3 other sisters. And they found them in California. And this was Cynthia that was going to call me and introduce herself. Well, she called and I thought, oh, yeah, right. This is a scam. And it was that sort of an attitude when we first got started in our conversation. And probably a month later, I got another call. My sister said, hey, Cassandra is going to call you. I said, what? Who in the... That's another sister we found. And incidentally, we think there's a third, and we're looking for her. And when we do find her, I'll let you know. I said, well, quit looking. We got enough. Who are these people and what do they want? And is it because I don't know what to expect. Well, sure enough, a month later, got a call from an assistant named Francine. So that's how I say when I say we have 12 brothers and sisters, there were 9 of us that lived together and we knew each other very well. The other 3 were sold. One of which, as a matter of fact, was sold for a horse and a pony. I know it sounds very convoluted and almost out of the world, but by and large, that's exactly what happened. They were sold.
Were they sold to just somebody wanted a baby and they weren't able to have one?
As far as I know, of course, I was too young. I didn't know what the deal was. But regardless, they were sold and ultimately adopted by other people.
Wow.
Now we are fairly close, and we've had a couple of reunions, and we communicate regularly. But by and large, for all of my up through, I'd say 30 years old, I didn't know them. So growing up in a household like that, where you have a dad that he's older than my mother by 15 years. He's rather abusive. He drinks a lot, and he's very almost bipolar. I mean, nice one day and awful the next day. And you had to be, you had to grow up pretty quickly, and you had to grow up pretty tough. And so I assume that some of that had to do with how I became so very competitive. I knew right away, even as young as I was, that I had to do something on my own. I had to make it happen because I didn't want to be like that.
You had to get
the
away.
rest of my life.
Yeah. Well, earlier you said that that you felt different in that family. Were you made to feel different?
No, I wasn't necessarily made to feel different, but I felt like I was just one of the crew until my sister. Actually, it's kind of a funny story. I got into a fight with my father when I was 15 years old. What I say now, my father, this is the father that was the head of our house, not the guy that mother had the affair with.
Right.
And I got into a fight with him because I looked through a keyhole, and he had my mother in the living room, and I was with the door locked, and I looked through the keyhole and saw him accosting her. And I finally had gotten big enough that I decided that wasn't going to happen anymore. So I busted through the door, and I got in a fight with my dad. And my mother, of course, freaked out, so she sent me outside. Well, here came my dad, and he had his gun with him, his rifle, and he put that right in my face. And he said, "If you ever touch me again, I'm going to shoot you." He said, "You're not even my son." And that was the first realization I had at 15 years old. What do you mean I'm not your son? You're not even my son. I don't know why I don't just shoot you now. I said, well, and now at 15, you understand you don't have a whole lot of sense. I was so upset, and I had seen him hit my brothers and sisters, but never my mother. And now I'm so upset. I said to him, he's pointing that gun in my face, and I said, "If you ever touch my brothers and sisters or my mom again, you'll wish you pulled that trigger right now, because it isn't going to happen anymore. I'm going to be their protector." And things like that, Greg, cause you to grow up much quicker than you actually should. You realize that, hey, now I've opened a door. My father moved immediately. He left home.
Wow.
And never did. My mother and father never did divorce, but they never did live together again, at least during my time at home. So I knew that I was responsible for some of that, but I was also proud that he wasn't going to touch my brothers and sisters anymore. I hope that explains some of my competitiveness.
Did you immediately take on the responsibility as head of the family?
Well, I wouldn't say that, because I had two sisters and another brother that lived at home that were older than I and were a little more responsible. However, the two older sisters soon thereafter left. They left home because of the abuse and so forth, and married at a very young age, and lived elsewhere. So yeah, I was essentially the head of the household, although I didn't consider myself that. I just considered myself to be the protector, if you please.
Yeah.
Not sure the better description of whether you're the head of the household or you're a protector, but I felt very strongly that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's perception. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what you thought in your head. How
Yeah.
did you feel? Like,
Yeah.
what did it do? But I mean, 15, that basically means it's like that, was that Bible verse, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I thought as a child, I understood as a child, I spoke as a child. Now that I'm a man, I put away childish things. And so to me, that sounds like you turned a page and said, I can't be a kid anymore.
Yeah, well, no question about that happened. I wanted to still be a kid because I you're not mature enough to be otherwise at the time, but
physically,
you also
emotionally,
began to understand that there's more to this life than me just being a floating around kid with no concerns. Now have some responsibility, and I took up wrestling in school during that time, and I was a pretty good wrestler, very good wrestler. I don't say that braggingly. I'm just telling you that that helped my competitiveness too, I might add, and because of that, I got pretty good grades in school. I wasn't the best student, but I got pretty good grades because I brought notoriety to the school from my accolades that I received as a result of winning wrestling matches.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So when I got ready to graduate from high school, I really had a couple of scholarship offers, but in wrestling, you don't get a full scholarship, a full ride that would cause you to, we were so poor, and now my mother we were on welfare, and we were, it was just a really tough situation. So I decided, look, I can't put my family through that. I got to do something else. So I looked at the services, and I read about the GI Bill, and I decided I'd go in the Air Force and spend 4 years in the Air Force and get the GI Bill when I got out, and I could go to college that way. Now, keep in mind, I didn't know a whole lot about college because most of our family did not even graduate from high school. So it was, and here I am going to go off for 4 years. Would I get lost in the service and stay, or would I really do what I wanted to do? And it turns out that I ended up doing exactly what I planned to do. And it worked out great in the service because interestingly enough, I was what they call a flight engineer. It really is, you have an airplane that you're responsible for, both maintenance and upkeep and all that kind of stuff. And if that plane flies, you often fly with it. As the flight engineer, you don't have anything to do with piloting or anything like that. You simply get the plane ready, get the plane clean, get the plane fueled, and all that kind of stuff. Well, it turns out that I met a guy named General Bill Lindley, who was a graduate of Sam Houston State, and he took a liking to me for some reason. And of course, I was an airman, low-class airman at the time, and he was a general. And the likelihood of him taking a liking to a person of that rank, it was pretty strange. But regardless, he did. And he then suggested to the Air Force that anytime he flew, he wanted me to be his flight engineer. Interestingly enough, he was in charge of Air Force ROTC around the U.S. for the Air Force. And so we flew to a lot of different universities all over the U.S.
Right.
And it was a great experience because I got to, while he was doing his business, I could stroll the campus and kind of get a feel for. Before I got ready to finish my 4 years and branch off into going to college, he called me one day and he said, I want to meet you in my office. Well, he was in an area on the base that airmen didn't go to, but he said, yeah, I'll have him pick you up and bring you. So I went to his office and sat across the desk from him, and he said, Ron, what are you going to do when you get out of the service? And are you going to get out of the service? I said, well, I want to, yes. I want to go to college. I don't have particularly impressive credentials. I don't know where I want to go, although I sort of think I want to go to Texas A&M University because my wife's parents live in Bryan, and they're graduates of A&M. And so, I kind of would like to do that, but I'm not sure I can get in there. He said, well, what would you consider close enough? What would Sam Houston, which is 55 miles away, would that be? I said, well, yeah. I said, there is an advantage to going to a school that close because we have a new child. Our only child had been born at Maxwell Air Force Base there in Montgomery. And I said, I'd kind of like for my wife and I to be her real parent, not leave her with my mother-in-law and father-in-law all day. So, I could. He said, "Well, let me tell you something. The dean of admissions at Sam Houston is a friend of mine. We were roommates in college, and I'm going to call him and see what I can do." So he called him while I was sitting there in front of his desk, and he called up the dean, and he said, "Dean, I've got this guy sitting in front of me that's going to be getting out of the service sometime in February or March, and I want him to go to Sam Houston. Could you take care of it?" I could tell that the dean asked him, "What's his credentials?" He said he doesn't have any credentials. He hadn't taken the GRE, he hadn't done any of that stuff. "But I want him in school. And I know school probably starts in January, right?" "Yeah." Whatever date that was in January. He said, "Well, I'm going to get him out of the service in time to be there. Could you take him? He's in." I never took the GRE. I never did any of that stuff. I got out of the service. The general was good to his word. He got me out early. And I went to Sam Houston State. And I finished a bachelor's and master's in 4 years. And I never got any B's. So, and again, all of that, Greg, sort of plays into that competitiveness stuff. Here's somebody that did a favor for me, and I've got to return the favor by being a good student. Here's somebody that I never knew, and he liked me, and he did this, so what do I can do for him? Interestingly enough, when I finished my master's degree at Sam Houston, I was working for the university with a construction company, and the construction company, we were tearing down the dean of students' office. Moose Morton was his name, and I got acquainted with him because I was tearing down the walls to his office and whatever, and he was in a temporary office. We got to talking, and he said, "Now what are you going to do when you get that master's?" I said, "Well, I'm not sure. I sort of thought I'd like to go back in the Air Force and fly. You have to be an officer to fly." And I said, and to be an officer, obviously, you had to have a college degree. And so I said, I think I sort of want to go back but I said, my wife doesn't want me to. She grew up in the Air Force. Her dad was a pilot, and they spent 22 years in the Air Force, and she would really not want to re-enter that kind of lifestyle. So I said, I'm a bit confused. He said, "Well, I got a friend at North Texas that I talked to just yesterday that needs some help." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, you could go up there and get a PhD and maybe have a job too." I said, "Oh, really? Well, who is it?" He said, "Bill Lindley." I said, "No, you're kidding me." He had retired while I was going to school, and was now the vice president at North Texas. So Moose said, "I'm going to call him, and I'm going to have him call you." Well, he called me. He said, "Ron," he said, "small world. I need you. Would you like to come up here and work on your PhD and go to work for me?" I said, "I couldn't think of anything I'd rather do. Just got to check with my wife, and we'll be there." Well, I did. We went there, and we started out as a head resident, if you please, of a brand new high-rise dorm that was going to have, for the first time at North Texas, men and women with a common dining area and lounge and all that. And all the athletes were going to be in there. So it was going to be quite an experience, because at North Texas, most of the athletes were kind of scallywags, a lot of junior college kids and whatever, and they were a rough crowd. And the general knew that. So he said, "I need somebody that I can trust to come and put a handle on all that. And I know you, and you can do it." I said, I'm not sure that I agree with your confidence in me, but I'll do it." So we did. And we spent a couple of years in that dorm, and it was a rugged experience, but we worked through it all right. And finally, when I finished my coursework, had not yet written my dissertation, was starting on that, I got a call from Texas Tech University, and their dean of students was retiring, and they were in the throes of trying to find a replacement. And they said, "We'd like to interview you." And I said, "Well, I don't know that I've ever been to Lubbock. Well, we'll send you a flight and bring your wife, and let's run this interview." I said, No. Don't send me any flight. We drive. And the reason for that is I know it's a good ways out there, and I don't know what to expect. So I want my wife and I to not be surprised.
Right, get a good feeling for it. Yeah.
So we got in the car, and we drove out there. When I got to the edge of Lubbock, during the 3/4 of the way there, my wife said, "No, ain't no way. There's no way." And the closer we got to Lubbock, the more she was convinced this is not me. So when I got to the edge of town, I called the chairman of the search committee, and I said, "Look, I appreciate very much your interest in me. I'm honored that you asked me out, and we're on the edge of town, and we're going to spend the night, and then we're going back. And I don't need to bother you for an interview. I don't need, because my wife and I we just, oh, Ron, you got to stay. You got to stay. Everybody that comes to Lubbock says that. So you give us the privilege of interviewing you tomorrow, and then you make your decision." I said, "Well, you deserve that courtesy, so I'll do it." So I did. And sure enough, at the end of the interview, I said, "Well, I'm not convinced. I'm just not convinced that this is a place that I could be comfortable with." And particularly, I don't want to throw my wife under the bus, but she has to be happy too, because if mom ain't happy, I ain't happy.
Yeah.
So I turned them down. Went back to start working on my dissertation, and pretty soon I got a call from Texas A&M. And they said, "Look, Ron, we're looking for a director of student activities. Actually, it's not activities, student affairs, and we've gotten a high recommendation on you. Would you come interview?" Well, Texas A&M, and her parents still lived here in town, had always been of interest to me. So I said, "Sure, I'll come." So, I came down, and they were in the throes of the vice president of student affairs to be retiring, and they had gotten down to 3 candidates for the vice president's job. All 3 I knew, and 2 of which I wouldn't want to work for, but 1 of which I would love to work for. He was at East Texas State, a guy named John Coldis. And so they offered me the job, and I said, "Well, let me think about it, and I'll get back to you." And the reason I did that, Greg, is because I wanted to see who they were going to actually hire. And when they announced that, then I could make a decision, yes, I'll come or not. Well, they called me even the following week. "Ron, we're still waiting for your answer." I said, "Okay, I'll give it to you." "When are you going to announce it?" "Well, he's going to be announced tomorrow." "Okay." They announced him, and it was John Coldis, who was my friend from East Texas. I called them immediately and said, "I'll take the job." John and I started on the same day, 1973, August 1st, 1973, and we officed 2 doors apart in the YMCA building. And when I came, I worked for a guy named Powell, and he and John didn't get along too well, so John moved him out of that and put me in charge of that department. It's like a dean of students in housing and counseling and discipline and off-campus center and all that kind of stuff. We had probably 17 different. So I did that, and because I spent 4 years in the Air Force, then 4 years at North Texas and was on the employment up there. That gave me 8 years of service and 12 years more at Texas A&M, and I could retire. So when I was about 44, 45, 46, somewhere in there, I retired from A&M because I always had this interest in private business. I always I didn't want to spend the rest of my life working for somebody else. I wanted to try my own hand at running a business. I did an academic study on what to do, and in the course of the study, I decided a couple of things that were important to me. One, that whatever it chose to do, it had to be number one in the field, whatever it was. Number two, they had to have a good training program. And three, they didn't just leave you high and dry once you paid the money to get in.
Right.
So I applied. One of the places I applied to 3 or 4, but one of them I applied to was McDonald's, with the understanding from Ruth that she would be willing to do it with me. Now, she had her own little real estate company here in town and was a quite accomplished realtor, but she said, I'm willing to give all that up, sell my company and sell our house and do whatever. So sure enough, we went to an interview in Houston with the regional vice president, and they were really interested, not because we had a lot of money, because we were university types, we didn't have but because I had been a mayor, I'd been a council member.
So you'd already been a mayor at this point.
I'd already been a mayor while I was still at the university.
Just gloss over that, yeah.
And I had chaired the Economic Development Corporation here in town for the Brazos County and the Texas Municipal Power Authority. I chaired that. I chaired a number of things. And so they were very impressed with my background. And of course, Ruth having her own little business, they were impressed with that. So they immediately said, we want you to be in our program. We went to training in Brenham, and we trained for 15 months, 8 months there, and then they moved us back over here. Because at the outset, I didn't want to announce to anybody, including my boss, John Colas, that I was training to do that. I had probably 200 employees around the campus, and I didn't want them to think I was leaving in case I decided not to. I didn't want to upset the apple cart.
Right.
But we did that for 8 months in Brenham, and then I announced that, that's what I was doing. I was going to retire, and we'll work on getting a replacement for me at the university. And we were going to, and ultimately we, after Hamburger University, we were awarded a store, the first store in Houston in Southwest Houston, Bissonnette and Dairy Ashford. And we started in that store and put all of our money. I mean, we sold our house, we sold our car. We had 2 cars. We sold one of our cars. I took my retirement. Ruthie took anything that she made from her real estate, and we put it in the first store. And we were there in Houston for almost 11 years. In the course of those 11 years, we had 5 stores. We ultimately got, one at a time. Over the course of that time, we had 5 stores. And then the market here became available. The people that owned the Bryan College Station were dear friends of ours, and they had been in the business quite a while, and they wanted to retire, and they wanted to sell. And the company wanted them to sell because it was a situation where it had kind of grown old to them, and they weren't keeping the stores up like the company wanted. So when they went to the regional vice president and said, we want to sell, he said, I got the perfect person, Ron and Ruth Blatchley. He knows all the people there. He knows the university. She knows, we got the perfect people. Why don't you visit with them? Well, we did. And we made a deal with them. And we sold our 5 stores in Houston. And we moved back here in 1996. They had 8 stores. And I closed 2 of them in the first month. They were not productive in the mall and in a Walmart. The Walmart in College Station had one. It wasn't productive. I think it was poorly run. The one in the mall was not productive. I think it was poorly run. And frankly, all of them were poorly run. They had been, for lack of a better word, basically raped for profit as opposed to upkeep, and done some things that McDonald's wasn't happy about. So I had some work to do to get that restored. And over the course of the next few years, we tore down some of those stores. I closed some. I bought some. And ultimately, by 2002, we had 13 stores. We were our own co-op, so that what I mean by that is when we were in Houston, we were in a co-op with 50 different operators from all over that area, from Galveston to Houston. And here we were our own co-op. Ruth and I had our co-op meetings on the Pillow. And as a result, because all of our stores were in the same marketing area and involved with the same TV and radio stations, we could decide what to do on our own, what kind of promotion we want to run, what kind of pricing, what kind of whatever, along within the confines of McDonald's, of course. So it was a very desirable market. So when we got ready to retire, again, we had told McDonald's, we'd not told McDonald's, to be honest with you, that we were not going to spend more than 20 years in McDonald's. And that we wanted really to have 10 stores, but you couldn't tell them that at the outset. You get one at a time, and you're lucky to get the next one, whatever. So sure enough, at that point, we were ready to retire. I had done a fairly extensive study on what it would require to get retired and for Ruth and I to be at least economically settled for the rest of our time together. And so I hired a company out of Plano to come and study. And they took about 6 months and studied all of our situation, what bills we had in McDonald's, whatever. And the one thing I said to the company was, I want to have, when we sell, if we sell, I want to be able to, I don't want to live extravagantly, but I want to be able to live comfortably. And I'd like to have $1 million on the side to build a house in Colorado, in Vail, Colorado, and actually Beaver Creek. So they did the study, and 6 months later we had a meeting with them, and they said, Ron, we don't want you to tear down any more stores. We don't want you to build any more. We want you're settled. You to get all the money you need. We got a plan put together for you to settle this out. Whatever you do, whether you sell it to the company or sell it back to whoever, we got a plan for you. And what do you think? Well, my wife raised her hand immediately. She said, "We're done. We're done." She handled the back office and all of the government paperwork and all of the payroll and all that kind of stuff. I took care of the actual operations, and so she was at the end of her rope with all of that kind of stuff. It began to get more extensive what the government wanted and how you had to keep this record and that and all that kind of stuff. So she was anxious to fold up our tent and go about the rest of our life. So we called the regional vice president. I'm going to have breakfast with you. He came to our house, and we sat down and said, look, we've done this study. We didn't tell you this when we started, that we wanted to have 10 stores. We didn't want to spend more than 20 years. But we've come to that point. It's 19 years and 6 months. And we want to sell and retire. No way. No possible way. As a matter of fact, I came today all the way from Houston thinking about how many stores I wanted you to take in Austin. He said, you guys have done such a great job. We won every award you could win. And I don't say that braggingly. I'm just telling you.
Right.
That's that competitive nature. I'll show you some of those awards. Everything you could win. The company just loved us. I incidentally represented the operators of Texas at the national level and ended up being appointed to the McDonald's board of directors. So we had a pretty good reputation. So in any event, he said, I've got 10 stores at least in Austin. I went, no. Larry, I'm convinced that you have to be intricately involved in these stores. And I don't want to travel 100 miles to have stores over there. I'm honored that you think that way, but I couldn't live with myself. I said, I've got so many cameras in all 13 of our stores. I spend 18-hour days every day, including on Sunday. Ruth spends an intolerable amount of time. And I said, it's important that we give the best service in the cleanest atmosphere that ever was possible in McDonald's. And I can't do that 100 miles away. He said, well, now you know that we have the first right of refusal. I said, that's right. I understand that. He said, so what do you want for the stores? I said, well, Larry, you're not going to like what I say, but I'm going to tell you that, as you know, all of our stores are rated A. You get a rating every year. And I've got 27 HU trained managers. I've sent every one of them. Cost about $5,000 a manager to send them. I've got a complete staff. I've got everything is just right. And Larry, we are a market of its own, as you well know. And the only reason you would want this market is because you could do some experimenting, and it wouldn't affect anything going on in all the other markets. You could do menu, you could do pricing, you could do whatever you want to do. And I said, so it makes it a pretty valuable commodity. And besides that, there's a growing university right beside all of our stores that we've got. So am I going too far with all this?
Keep trucking.
Okay. So he said, well, I have to agree with you. I said, so I want 5 times cash flow. What? Ain't no way. We've never paid. McDonald's has never paid more than 3.5 times cash flow. I said, I know. They never bought my stores before. He said, well, what makes you think? I said, I just explained all that, and you know it already. And I said, that's what I want. And if McDonald's doesn't want to do that, then you send me, they have to approve any operator. You send me individuals, and I'll sell the stores individually. It's crazy to do that because you'd be screwing up the market. You want somebody to run the whole market.
Right.
But I'll do whatever, but I want 5 times cash flow. We've put our blood, sweat, and tears in these things, and this is what I want. He said, okay, I'll submit it to the McDonald's. He did. And a funny story about that. So a week and a half later, I got a call from the CPA at McDonald's corporate in Oak Brook, Illinois. And I knew him pretty well. Of course, I told you I'd been on that board. And he said, Ron, I got to talk with you about the sale of these stores. I said, yeah, okay. I've been expecting a call. He said, well, Larry tells me you want 5 times cash flow. There's no possible way. We just can't do that. So I want to try to negotiate a deal with you. I said, well, I'm going to be hard-pressed to negotiate. About the time he was talking to me, the president of McDonald's, good guy, super fine guy. Ruth and I had just been in Hawaii with them, probably 6 months before, where they recognized the top operators, and we went to Maui for a week at their expense. And anyway, he walked by, he said, who are you talking to? I could hear him. And he said, I'm talking to Ron Blatchley. Oh, let me have that phone. So he got on the phone. He said, what's up, Ron? What are you doing? I'm talking to our CPA here. I said, well, Tim, Ruth and I have decided to retire and sell. No way. No possible way. No way. We aren't going to let that happen. We can't. We can't. I said, that's very nice of you. Very nice. I'm honored. But I said, yeah, we think it's the right time. He said, holy cow. He said, I hate losing people like you. I said, well, that's nice. He said, let me ask you a question. You know we own Chipotle. I said, I know that. At that time, they had 80% of Chipotle. He said, would you consider going into Chipotle? We don't normally have McDonald's operators go in Chipotle, but would you consider it? I said, well, as a favor to you, I would. He said, okay, I'm going to send the president. I'm going to have him call you, and you guys get together and see if we can keep you in the system that way. You may be out of McDonald's, but you'll be in Chipotle, and you'll still be with us. I said, okay. Now he turned to his CPA and he said, whatever he wants, get him. Within 30 minutes, we had faxed back and forth the deal. And God bless both McDonald's and the CPA, and for Ruth and I's case, a blessing for sure. And
what was the feeling like when that paperwork finally went through?
Well,
was that just relief?
No, I had mixed reactions. Ruth had great relief, but I had mixed reactions because I liked the whole business of having a staff, having stores everywhere. I mean, I'm not a sleeper. I'm a doer. I'm in the middle of that. And, I call your store in Hearn. You're the manager. Hey, Greg, how come that guy's been standing in front of your counter for 2 minutes and hadn't been served yet? At 3 o'clock in the morning. That was just me. I mean, you'll read in that book that I let you read some of the things I did in McDonald's. But regardless, it was a delight on the one hand, but we had a lot to do. I didn't have time to reminisce over whether or not this was a good decision. Now all of a sudden he made the deal. I signed it. Ruth signed it. We sent it back, confirmed. And now what do? I got to figure out. So one of the things that we did is I got with our CPA and I said, look, we're going to own a lot. We're going to owe a lot of taxes.
Oh yeah.
And I don't like sending my money to the government any more than I have to.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind being a good citizen, a tax-paying citizen, but I don't like the way they spend it a lot of times. So what can I do? Well, we came up with a plan to sell one of the stores into a charitable foundation. And so we did. And we sold the store, put $3 million in the charitable foundation. And we still are administering that, and it's kind of gone up and down with the stock market. But regardless, we have it figured out for the distribution, and that helped us. It saved us probably $450,000 or so, maybe more. I don't know. But regardless, we did that, and it took me a year to get that all worked through. At the same time, my wife had. Our granddaughter and grandson lived with us through high school. Their mother, our only child, had been divorced 3 or 4 times, and she was still struggling with her own person and moved back to Houston, and I had hired her here, and she back to Houston, and they didn't want to go. So they moved in with us from 7th grade on, and that was important because our granddaughter, when she became a junior, she went to I think IMDA or something like that. I don't know what it is, some national thing where she was hired by Hollywood. She got an agent and a manager, and she went to this thing as a junior. So we decided that since we were selling, that Ruth would move to Burbank with her for a year temporarily. In an apartment. We'd put her in a school out there because she didn't need any more classwork, but we wanted her to have friends in Burbank.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Because if she made it, she'd be there for long after we were gone. And so that's what happened. Ruth did that while I closed the deal. Well, we still owned an office building and automobiles, trucks and whatever. So, I had other things I had to do. I didn't sell the office building to the corporation. They didn't need it. So I had other things that I had to put together. And the one promise that I made to Ruth, as soon as we sold, she said, now, Ron, I know that you know all these people, and they're going to start calling you, and they're going to want you to do this, that, or the other. Run this company for them, being a consultant, do whatever. And I want to ask your favor. What's that? Do not agree to do anything for a year.
Right.
Absolute 1 year.
Yeah.
I said, that's a fair request. After you've spent 20 years doing all this McDonald's stuff, that's a fair request. So I didn't do a thing for a year. Went back and forth to Burbank, did other kinds of stuff around town, played a lot of golf, all that kind of stuff. And a year and a day later, I started a construction company. In Traditions, I bought 12 lots in Traditions. As a charter member there, I could get a discount on all the lots. And I didn't, during my time in McDonald's over the course of those 20 years. I had either torn down, remodeled, or constructed from the beginning 10 different stores. And it took an interest in construction. Had no construction background, don't have any degrees in construction, and none of that kind of stuff. So I decided I was going to hire a construction manager. My neighbor was a professor at A&M in construction science. I went to him and asked him who. He gave me a contact. I hired that guy. I also hired my neighbor to come after each month and check his work to make sure that he was satisfied that what he had taught him he was doing. And I learned how to be a contractor by virtue of that. Right. We built about 30, 35 houses in Traditions. And Traditions are all pretty high-end houses. We started out with five houses that were not custom. And once we got our reputation going, then we started doing custom houses only. And we did about 30, 35 houses in Traditions. Only in Traditions, because I could go to the construction site every day on my golf cart with my dog, my Jack Russell Terrier, and look at every 2x4 that went in the house. And one of the things I said to anybody that we did business with was, look, we're not going to be the cheapest to build for, but we're going to be the best. You're not going to get bells and whistles as much as you're going to get absolute quality. You want to know what's behind the wall? I'm going to know every detail behind the wall. Nothing will get covered up without me watching it. And so if you're looking for bells and whistles and cheap construction, I'm not your guy. Second thing is, I want to be your friend before we build and after we build. And incidentally, I don't build for attorneys and CPAs. I just made that real plain because, with attorneys, they can sue you for whatever, and it doesn't cost them anything, but it costs you a lot. So I said, I don't build for that. When you didn't need to do it for a living, you could make a lot of rules.
Right.
Somebody else wouldn't.
Yeah, you pick the customers.
Yeah, you get to do a lot of different things. So that's what I did for the next 15 years. Built houses in Traditions, including 2 or 3 for us. And then when I turned 75, I decided to hang up my hammer. I decided, okay, look, I don't know how much life I've got left, but my parents both died at an early age from heart disease, and I've already had heart disease. I had 6 bypasses in 1998. So, here I was 20 years later, and I needed to slow down a little. Keep in mind that competitive nature of mine. I'm in the middle of things, going crazy. So I decided, I said, Ruth, I know I just built you a really beautiful house, but I'm going to hang up my hammer if it's okay with you. Yeah, I'm anxious. But we're going to move. What? I love my house. I know you do, but we've got to move. And I'll tell you why, Ruthie. All the people that I've built for have friends that are coming back here as Aggies. They won't build in, and my reputation has come to a point where they want me to build. These people that I've built for say, there's only one builder you want to build. I said, I have 4 houses left to do. I'm going to find builders for them, and I want to pack up and leave. Because I don't want to be inundated by people that want me to do an addition on their house or a revision on their house, or they want me to build for their best friend and the only builder they would recommend. I said, it's an honor, but it's also a burden. And so let's move. We found this house. We'd been looking over here anyway a little bit. We found this house. It was a friend of mine that owned it, and he had gotten Alzheimer's and was going to the hospital. And his daughter was the realtor, and we said we'd like to have that house if it's okay. We signed the papers that night, and we didn't move in for 4 months because I redid the entire everything. Out there is a casita, and it used to be an art studio, and then the guy's office, and I converted it to a living area. And friends stay there, and we've had a lot of different people that have used it for free as part of our, I'd say our Christian responsibility of taking care of folks. But regardless, we moved, and we've been here now almost, 5 years. We're pretty involved with our church. I'm involved with pickleball.
Yeah.
And every piece of landscaping, including the lawn, the irrigation, the sprinkler system, the everything out there I've done, including I built this porch on here, this covered porch. So that's kept me busy, is what I'm saying. And pickleball has kept me busy. I've been very active behind the scenes. My deal with the mayors since I returned in 1996 has been, look, I want to help the city. I have an interest in the city, but I do not want to be in the newspaper. I do not want to be on TV. I do not want to be, I don't want any accolades. If there's anything good that happens, it's you. You're the mayor. You get the credit for that, not me. But behind the scenes, I've been very, very involved. Medical school out there, that property. Now you know about the thing at the golf course, the old golf course, municipal golf course, the Legends. Very much involved in that. I went to Hoover, got all the plans, took them to the city manager, worked through that all behind the scenes. Actually, the golf course, as it is, the municipal golf course, Travis Bryan Park, I negotiated the deal for them to get that area and move the municipal golf course to Briarcrest. All behind the scenes, I negotiated all that, and I enjoy doing that kind of stuff. It's my cup of tea, and I'm fairly. I don't know if I can say this, not sound egotistical, but I'm fairly good at that, because I'm gonna try to do something that is fair for you and fair for us, that makes sense for both parties, and that's precisely, as you know, my dear friend Wallace Phillips, who bought. Wallace called me one day and he said, "Ron," he said, "I know you negotiated a deal for the city to buy Briarcrest and make that the golf course." And he said, I know that the city turned down your proposal. And I said, yeah. He said, well, I stepped in after I heard that happen, and he said I wanted to buy it, and I did. I said, Wallace, good for you. I said, but let me just tell you, if you're looking to buy a golf course and you think you're going to make money, you're not. The golf course is not going to make any money, but there's 330 acres over there, and you could subdivide that into a development. He's a developer. He's done Castlegate, Castle Rock. He's doing that, with the old
racetrack kids out there.
Yeah. He's doing all that kind of stuff. I said, you because that's not, you could change that place if it didn't turn out good. You could change that. He said, good idea. Well, he went to I don't know whether he go to an architect or land planner or whatever, and they planned that up to have 335 lots. So he had that evaluated, worth almost $7 million. And he called me one day and he said, Ron, he said, I got a problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, well, I did all that, and you know what the value is. He said, but in the meantime, we had a flood down in Houston, and all those cars that they got flooded, they want a place to park them. And he said, I let them use that area up there by the, you probably remember.
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah.
He said, they paid me $7 million. He said, now I got a problem tax-wise. I said, Wallace, I got an idea for you. Why don't you make the golf course a gift to the city and get them to write off on it, and you get a $6 million write-off. That's what happened. That's what happened. Worked out good for him, worked out great for the city. And with that, we could move the golf course over here and then have that to develop. At one point, we were going to put the medical school there, but it didn't be a big enough property. So that's how all that's developed. Now, you probably know about Chicken and Pickle.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, so Chicken and Pickle, I went to play up there right after they opened in Kansas City, and I met the owner. He wanted me to invest. My wife overheard him and said, no, he's not investing in anything. But I said, I wouldn't mind seeing you down where we live. I said, well, that's down the road a ways. Well, pretty soon, a few years later, they called me and said, Ron, do you know anybody with Chicken and Pickle? Yeah. I said, well, could you help us get in touch with? Yeah. So he came down and we met, and that's when we got started looking at the possibility of them building the Chicken and Pickle on that golf course, because he was going to build it big enough and enclose an area for tennis, and tennis on the campus does not have indoor tennis. And so that's how that all, well, it's fallen through, and there's other things happening with all that kind of stuff. But regardless, I guess I've probably told you enough to keep you alive for a while.
Yeah, well, I've got questions, believe it or not. As you know, you talk about this stuff, I kind of make notes along the way. I was waiting for you to take a breath so I could ask you some, but I love to hear a story. Genuinely, this is one of my favorite parts. It's just somebody to tell me a story. But I've noticed a common thread that kind of moves through a lot of this, and I want to see if you have an answer to it. It seems like I'm not going to call you a control freak, but you are a control advocate, a big control fan. You like having control of your environments. Like you were talking about at the stores, you know, you had all those cameras you can watch. You could see what was going on, right? And you were talking about with your construction company, you could watch every 2x4 go up. Like to me, that's somebody who definitely wants to maintain a certain level of one, competency in what is going on so that you know when something's not right or when it is, but also control of the final product. And I was wondering, why is it so important for you to maintain control of everything like that?
Well, that's a good question, Greg. I am a control freak. I'm an organizer, a very strong organizer. And my wife is of the same mold. She is organizer of a different sort, but we both are very, very organized. And I feel like, you know, being organized requires you to be intricately involved. Because if I say to you, I'm going to build you a house and I'm going to charge you this kind of money, it is a personal deal to me that I got my reputation at stake. I've got my company at stake, and I want to make sure it's exactly right. And the only way I know to make sure it's exactly right, and this is not good business, but it's my style, is for me to be intricately involved. And you're right, I am a control freak. Example, I'll give you an example. You'll read this in the book that I gave you. In McDonald's, you know, when you have 13 stores, you got 500 employees, and you're spread out, and you can't be in each one of those stores at all times. But one of the things that I did is I wore a name tag. And whatever store I went to, I worked at the window or at the counter because I wanted Greg, who shows up through drive-through, to see the owner is right there. If you had a problem, I want to know about it. You can tell me in drive-through, that's the owner, or at the counter. And I wanted to be involved in that. Now, one of the things that I recognized early on in McDonald's was that everybody that came into the store, 80% of those people went to the bathroom. 80%. I immediately recognized that 2 or 3 things. One, the grounds around the store need to be perfectly clean. No trash anywhere, because that says something about what's going on inside. But more importantly, when you walk across that threshold, it's got to be shiny. No grit, no dirt, no nothing. When we bought the stores in 1996, you couldn't even tell those were thresholds. They were so black. And I showed everybody how I wanted them cleaned. pot brush. I got on my knees and showed them everything I wanted done. Then I took them to the bathroom and I said, now look, when you wash your hands in the men's room and you still are kind of wet and you're drying them off, the water's going down the tile and in the grout. I don't want that grout to show any dirt. So I'm going to give you all a toothbrush. That's how clean I want it to be. So when I went to stores every day, I always had in my Suburban a small bucket and a pot brush. And I carried a group of toothbrushes in my pocket. If I came to your store and there was some speck of dirt in that threshold, I would not say a word to you. I'd go back to my truck, get my bucket, go to the bathroom, fill it up, get down on my hands and knees and start cleaning your throat. You didn't want that to happen. You don't want that to happen. If I went to your bathroom and I'd take my toothbrush out, clean it a little bit, and then I'd leave you a toothbrush. You didn't want that to happen. That's an example of why I'm like I am. It's sort of the matter of competitive. It's a matter of I got to be in charge of everything. I gotta have a handle on everything. I got to be, Now, Greg, when you go to the stores now, and I don't mean to castigate anybody in a bad light, you would never recognize that we owned those stores at one time. They're not anywhere near, and the operator lives in Huntsville. So my point was, that's just my personality. Let me tell you something. When I was growing up, I saw my dad, not my blood dad, but my dad, take advantage of a number of people. I remember an old man that came and he had borrowed some money from this guy, and the old man was destitute, and he came to the house and knocked on the door, and my dad hid. And we went to the door, and the old man in tears wanted his money. And I never forgot that. It bothered me so much that I said I never, ever, ever want that to happen. As a result, I don't owe anybody anything. Never have. We had to borrow money to get to stores, but that's the only thing I've ever done. Those kinds of things, I guess, have made me the kind of personality I am, good or bad.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's always advantages to being a control freak, right? Quality control and stuff like that, but everything comes at a cost. I mean, you said at some points you were working like 18 hours a day.
Yes.
And you're trading having a life or having time with your family or hobbies or anything else for control. And so how did you justify to yourself it was okay to work 18 hours, 7 days a week?
Well, let me just say this and answer your question. Our daughter, our only child, graduated from high school before we went to McDonald's.
Right.
And we made sure that happened too. It just coincided with my retirement. So that if we didn't make it, she wouldn't suffer.
Right.
Now, over the course of the 20 years at McDonald's, they observed, both she, her two children, our grandchildren, observed my work style. And they brag about it now. But on the other hand, I'm not so sure they were impressed with it at the time, because I was pretty strongly involved and pretty hard to, I just... Too intricately involved. You're right. If you're a control freak, you don't give the opportunity for those that have something to offer it. You almost supersede them, and that's not good. That's not good management. But I couldn't help my personality, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I never did change, and I suppose I could feel sorry about that. But on the other hand, I'm proud of what we accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you make a compromise, you convince yourself why it's okay to do that. And it sounded like you were putting the needs of everything else above yourself, right? And also partially the fact that you can't rely on anybody else, right? Like I have to do this all myself. I can't trust anybody. I know several people very close to me that are very much that way, and it's hard to sort of let go a little bit and then trust another person because
it is.
Because especially when you learn that lesson so young that this is how I survive. I have to do this to survive. It's hard to unlearn that.
It is very much so. I never did unlearn it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I see that and know that now. I frankly, I must admit in my prayers, I ask forgiveness for that kind of style. On the one hand, and the other, I'm blessed to having been successful.
Yeah. And it affords you ways to help other people.
Yes.
Right? So yours, it ended up being monetary, and you were able to, I'm sure you've helped tons of people, and I'm not going to ask you to name names because to me, it's like you just want to help people and be done with it. And I try and do that in my life too.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to brag about it. I don't want to make a big deal about it. I just want to help people and hope that they go on and be better for it.
You're right. I'm known to be, again, I want to be careful the way I say this so it doesn't sound boastful by any means. But because I grew up in a very poor family, and I remember so distinctly being on welfare and somebody else was paying our way, and that bothered me. I've become known as very generous, and that's important to me.
I grew up really poor, and I learned that nobody was going to give you anything. You had to go out there and work a little bit harder than everybody else. You have to study a little bit longer. You have to stay a little bit longer. You have to do what, to survive.
That's right.
And we've never borrowed money off of anybody. And contrary to that point, we help people all the time in any way we can. Yeah. But it's still in my brain where I wouldn't be able to ask anybody else for monetary assistance. Like it took me a long time to ask other people for help because I learned this lesson that when you give somebody, like you're going to ask somebody to help you or you're going to delegate something to them, you're giving them two things: the opportunity to succeed and the opportunity to fail. And you have to do both, you can't guarantee somebody's success. And so you have to just kind of let that go. And it's always been really tough for me still to this day.
Interestingly enough, when you talk about that, I'm like you. I've never borrowed any money from anybody. Matter of fact, when I was in the service, not being a drinker, not being a carouser, but wanting to be somewhat business, I lent my money to the other servicemen that played cards, gambled, and I charged them a fee.
The loan shark.
But my point with that is that now, in this stage of life, and obviously we've been blessed with more than adequate resources, I have shared a great deal of that, both with family, with church, and with members of the community. For example, no names involved, but Ruth and I went to Israel with our church and spent a couple of weeks on a trip in Israel. And we came back and we began to show the pictures and describe all of that to some of our dear friends. And we realized how offensive that was. They didn't say that, but we felt that. We felt like, golly, they would love to have done that, but they couldn't afford to do that. So we took them. The next trip, we took them totally at our expense. Well, they couldn't believe that. But for Ruth and I, it was cathartic. It was the kind of thing we could or should do. We've had probably 5 or 6 people in that casita out there that couldn't afford, wanted to finish their graduate work or work on one thing or another. They couldn't afford. They stayed for free. Because I feel very comfortable with the idea that both do we have the resources, but also do we have a responsibility to share. And that's where we are. Ruth is the same way.
Growing up really poor, I understood the power of money in the fact that people who don't have money see it as this thing to be sought after. And once I grew up and eventually got more successful, I'm not anywhere near where you were, but I'm very comfortable now. I view money less as like this object to be sought after, and I see it more as like a tool now. And you get to choose what that tool's for. Like, say for an example, a gun. You can use it to go commit a crime, or you can use it to go get food for your family, right? It intrinsically has no goodness or badness. It's whatever you want to use it for. I feel like money's the same thing. So you can use it to help other people, right? It's just a strategic tool. Unfortunately, some people still don't see it as that, right? And when I talk about money, I look at it as just another tool in my toolbox, right? Like, one for me is empathy, like to be able to see where people are and understand them. Another could be that. Another could be I have the ability to fix a lot of stuff. Like maybe that could be a thing I could help somebody with.
Yeah. Well, that's again another, I think, admirable, an admirable characteristic. I didn't want to be poor because I had quite an experience at being poor growing up.
Yeah.
But I never have sought out doing whatever I do to be rich.
Yeah.
Money has never meant that much to me. I just didn't want to be poor. The quality of my experience, the quality of my product was far more important to me than the acquisition of money for it. And frankly, I'm the same way now, and so is Ruth. A lot of people come to our home and they say, "Gosh, Ron, I mean, we like your little house, but you guys could have a, that's not important to us.
Yeah.
I'd rather have the money that we could have spent on something else to do something for someone." And so money has never been a big deal to me, other than I knew what it was like to be poor. I didn't want to be poor.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you get there, you never want to feel this way again.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing that happens, Greg, is that I have 8 great-grandchildren. My oldest grandson is 18. And I've wanted the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren and the grandchildren, our granddaughter and grandson, to learn what it takes to be successful. I don't talk about garnering money. I talk about what you have to do to pay the price to be successful. What are the things that are required of you as an individual to be successful? And therein lies some of the answer to the question you asked me earlier about, you spent 18 hours. I wanted them to see what it takes. I want them to understand that work ethic is not something you just talk about, but you do. It's part of your life. And for example, I'm struggling with my 18-year-old great-grandson right now with the whole concept of, I don't want to be an enabler on the one hand, but I don't want to be selfishly bad to him on the other. He's a senior in high school, and he doesn't have a job. And I've introduced him to 2 or 3 places to go to work, friends of mine, and he hasn't taken that up yet. And he's a pretty smart kid, but he doesn't go to school. He'll miss school and not tell his parents. Or I bought him a Jeep when he turned 16. Beautiful Jeep. It's been parked in his dad's parking lot or house for the year because he just squandered. And so I've felt a bit guilty about being an enabler with my resources instead of being an impetus for doing something well in life.
Well, I view it as life is like a scientific experiment. right? And so what we do is we come up with a hypothesis and we test it, right? And then whatever comes back, we adjust. We try again, we adjust, right? And so nobody ever gets anything right the first time. And I also think, like, I believe that if you do get something right the first time, you didn't learn anything, because I personally learn through failure. Like, I will learn how not to touch the stove, right? Or
Absolutely.
occupationally, I will fail, and then it will work. And then I will learn from that, and it will stay in my brain, and I will iterate on that. And I feel like life, no matter what part of it we're talking about, it's all a science experiment. So intrinsically, there's no good or bad necessarily, right? Like, as long as your intentions are good and you're adjusting and trying to be better every time, I think you're doing it right.
Well, Greg, I want to carry on that thought just a minute and say, Ruth and I have been married now, it'll be 61 years in June. We have one child, a daughter. She's been married 5 times. Still isn't happy, but is married. And Ruth and I have looked at each other on more than one occasion and said, what did we do wrong? What was it that we did in the course of our marriage that caused her to be so unsettled in her marriage? And some of that could be attributed to how hard I worked and how many hours I spent. But that was after she graduated from high school. So it wasn't like it was a learning experience for her early on. Now, admittedly, as a dean of students at A&M, I had a pretty big responsibility as well, and I spent a lot of time at that too, a lot of time. So I probably wasn't the best dad when it came to that. But by and large, as you said, Ruth and I look at that and say, okay, you remember in early years, there was a great deal of interest in Dr. Spock, how to grow a child, how to raise a family. And I was never sure that he had it figured out, to be honest with you, but I wasn't smart enough to know different. Ruth and I have always been involved in our Bible. And there's a lot of stuff in the Bible about how to raise your child or what the child should be like.
Right.
But nowhere does it tell you on a day-to-day basis what is that you should do when this situation comes up or that, or what's your daily routine with them. Nowhere does it tell you all that. You don't have like McDonald's.
The training, and you had a booklet that told you, okay, here's the way you do a hamburger here, step 1 through 20. But you don't get that in raising a child. And so at some point, you look back and say, what did I do right and what did I do wrong? Could I have done it differently? Should I have done it differently? Yeah, there's a whole bunch of that I think about now, but it's too late to do anything about it. On the other hand, nobody told me how. And Ruth and I were pretty young when we got married and pretty young when we had our only child. We had our only child while we were in the service because it cost me $7.80. And then we got out and went to school. And I don't know, just life went on real quickly, it seemed like, and maybe we didn't do a good job in the establishment of a system for our child. But not a thing we can do about it now. There never was a manual that told us how. There's still not. I've thought some of those exact same thoughts. What could I have done differently? One thing I've learned is you can't change the past, but I can be different in the future, right? And so you don't want to forget those things so that you don't repeat those mistakes. Yeah. But I've also heard you're going to screw up your kids just in different ways than your parents screwed you up, right? It's inevitable.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think, because I've done this exact same thing, you think, how did I go wrong? What did I do wrong? Because as a control freak, as a person who wants to be in control, if I am truly in control, I can adjust this, I can fix, I can change. Because to me, that still gives you control. It's kind of scary to think maybe I didn't cause this. right? Maybe this was outside of me, because kids live I know I did. I lived a whole life outside of my house, and I tried to never be at home if I possibly could.
Sure.
Just because it was an uncomfortable place to be most of the time. And we are like computers. Everything we run into is a new piece of information that goes into our brain, physically changes the makeup of our brain every time we have an interaction with somebody. And that builds over time. And ultimately, that's how you make decisions, right? A new situation arrives. Well, we go back into our data banks and everything that's happened to us, we adjust from there, right? Your parents are only a fraction of the piece of that. And while I think it's sort of noble to think that you had control over that, I think it's also a bit of hubris, right?
Yes.
Like to think that you could have done something that would ultimately change it. So it's just one of those things where you got to let it go. Yeah. Like it's not
one
of your
of the
making
things
always.
that makes that palatable, I think, Greg, is to hear and see both my daughter and my two grandchildren raising their family.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is my daughter says to Ruth and I both, I disappointed you all so much to have been married 5 times and you all have never been divorced. And, I'm so disappointed. Well, we say, hey, life goes on. You can't reminisce and feel bad about that. Just have the best time you can have now. But for her to admit that and say, I disappointed you, makes me feel like she understood more than I gave her credit for about what expectations were. Didn't do anything about it. She didn't. But she understood our expectations were, 5 times marriage is not our cup of tea. Good example is our 2 grandchildren. We see them raising their 4 children each. Each of them have 4. And I laugh when I hear them, be it scolding them or directing them or whatever, because it reminds me of what they learned from me. I heard my grandson the other night say to his son, the 18-year-old, when he asked about going out, I heard my grandson say, Pops told me when I was living in his house, nothing good happens after midnight. And that delights me to hear that they learned something that you didn't really know that they actually appreciated.
Is it the part of that, like, that you have a positive legacy through these people? Yeah. Is that what it is?
And you know what, Greg? And I tell them that now I understand more than ever how important my legacy is. I want it to be positive. I want it to be something they can reflect on in later life and have a good feeling for Pops and Nana. And so legacy is really important to me. Really important so that they see that while I might have been a control freak, I have a compassionate streak. I'm very compassionate. I'm very loving. I'm very giving. And I want them to see that about their Pops and their Nana. So anyway, I didn't mean to get off too far on that kind of stuff.
That actually kind of weaves into a thread. I feel like kind of quantifies this. And tell me how far off the mark I am, because I'm probably way off the mark. But it sounds like you really want to be useful to kind of prove to that child version of yourself that you're not that person, that you've risen above that. And it sounds like you're always working to kind of prove that you are useful and that you deserve to be here and that you have a place. Does that kind of feel like it?
Yeah. Let me just clarify a little bit. When you grow up in a family that never did anything of significance, never had anything, never did anything, and frankly depended on everybody else to take care of them, welfare and so forth, it in my mind, it's impacted my desire to do something productive in life, both productive for me personally, for my family, but also for society. our family, Blatchleys, that I know of, have never done anything of great value for society in general. They've just been leeches in this essence. In my case, I wanted not to be that. I wanted to be a productive member of our society, to actually be able to lay my head on the pillow and say, what did I do today? One of the things that I've always said to my staff is, at the end of the day, I think it's important for you to look behind you and see if you can see the evidence of your trail. What I mean by that is, what did you do today that bettered either your family, your friends, your society, in general, public, or whatever? So look behind you and then decide, can you see the evidence of your trail, and is it positive? That's real important to me. But I never started out like that. I'm just saying, at this stage in my life, that's important to me. And I say that I've said it to my staff at the university. I said it to my staff in McDonald's. What's the evidence of your trail behind you?
You know, I've thought about the exact same thing, and I've mused over this with a ton of people I've talked to, like the idea of legacy. And the one I've chosen is a legacy through people. And for me, because I was definitely thinking about, can I look back and see that change? And most of it is imperceptible. Like, it's such a gentle nudge that I've pushed this person in a different direction that I won't see those fruits for years, if ever. Like, maybe they won't be around me anymore, and maybe I won't see it.
Yeah.
You know, but like you said, your grandson recalling that little piece of wisdom, which I've heard that, and I say that to my kids too. It's like, nothing good happens after midnight. It's like, there's no reason to be out. Those little things, oftentimes you don't really see those. You don't see those ripples, those changes.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to see that piece of evidence. And so I think for a lot of people, it's maybe disheartening or demotivating. And what would you say to somebody? Because sometimes you just have to do it in the face of no evidence. Just knowing that me doing the right thing, me trying to put out that positivity or do the good stuff is the reason enough to keep doing it. I mean, every now and then I'll get a little piece of feedback. I'll hear something from somebody where this thing made a difference.
Inspires you.
That feeds me to keep me going long enough for the next one.
You're right. You know, one of the things that Ruth and I have been very passionate about is whatever we've done, I will say particularly in travel, we have tried to take a great number of pictures, and not just of the scenery, but of she and I's interaction with each other and how that relates to life in general. And as a result, I probably have 5 or 6 books that I've had produced that show that. And my hope is, don't know that it'll happen, my hope is that my great-grandchildren will look at those books and remember fondly their Nana and their pops. And I don't want them to just think, well, yeah, he gave me money for Christmas every year or whatever. I want them to think about, what did I learn from him? You know, and that's what I'm after.
Does that scare you a bit? The idea that, like, if you pass away 20 years after that, nobody will remember who Ron Blatchley was? Does that seem really important to you?
No. But I shouldn't say it like that so quickly, because my legacy has become incredibly important over the last 5 years. I know I'm getting close to being in heaven, and they will not have experienced what my daughter and my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren have a tougher life. Well, they've got a life to live, and I'm not sure they will. They'll even know me. So that does bother me a little bit, but I don't dwell on it.
But do you ever think about how the small times you've been with them have obviously impacted them and changed them?
Oh, no question.
For the better.
No question. When we go to Hot Springs, Arkansas, we spend every minute with them, and we do everything we can do and then some, including play games at the table. teach them new board games or whatever it is. And we get the sense that they can't wait to get back to see us. They can't wait for us to come visit. And yeah, that's important to us.
And that game, they'll grow up and they'll teach their kids that.
That's right.
And then their kids will grow up and teach their kids that. And that far down the chain, they'll have no idea why.
Yeah.
Why,
that's right.
Where that came from or
that's
why
right.
that came about.
Right.
But it'll be a source of joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, when I was growing up, I never played any games, but Ruth did. And boy, we really got into that during the pandemic. And now we play almost every day.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. It was the opposite for us. I played games and my wife didn't. And she still doesn't like playing games, but she'll still do it every now and then when we get together and stuff like that.
We try to play games, though. When I say games, it's not like slapjack. It's games that cause us to think. Rummikub, for example. You have to make words, you have to make letters and whatever. And we want the games that we play, you have to think about. It's not just throwing a card out or whatever. Because at our age, you got to keep expanding your mind, or trying to keep from it getting extinct.
I firmly believe that the day I quit learning is the day I truly die.
Oh yeah, no question, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and it's funny because I will change the way I think and believe on subjects. Like I heard recently somebody say, "Don't let your ideas become your identity," and that really hit home with me because I want to talk to somebody and have them challenge something I believe, and then I want to change my opinion on it. Yeah. And I do that semi-regularly, and that. To me, I hope I never lose that because I will be terrified if that goes away.
Yeah.
I always want to be flexible. I always want to take in new information. I've learned that I am not an expert on really anything, virtually anything. Somebody's always got something to teach me. And I genuinely, your wife was jokingly saying, why do you want to talk to this guy? Because I genuinely learn and I grow and I become a better human with every one of these conversations.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. One thing I didn't mention to you is, and I don't know why this happened, but I become a political animal. Need I even mention that I'm conservative? You can tell by my lifestyle I'm pretty conservative, but I've studied that a lot. I don't go to bed without listening to Tucker Carlson, for example, or any number of things that I do to stay abreast of what's going on in American politics, county, city, state, and federal. And sometimes I can be pretty close-minded about all that. And that bothers me a little bit. But and the reason I say that is because my whole family is coming right down the same trail. I'll get a text every other day or so from my daughter. Pops, did you see? Yeah. My granddaughter called me yesterday. Hey, did you see what they did on McCarthy? Yeah. And so I can tell they're all so, and I'm worried about that I've influenced them to that extent. But I'm a big political animal. I get a lot of calls from the politicians. We've done a lot of contributions to politicians.
I've noticed that stuff just causes me anxiety, like politics and trying to get involved in all that stuff. And for me, a lot of it feels overwhelming. Like even if I believe a certain way and the people surrounding me don't, that I'm just going to be drowned out. Comes back to that control thing. It makes me feel like I don't have control. So I try and be more one-on-one with people.
Sure.
Because to me, that's more, I guess, fulfilling to see the fruits of my energy, going towards individuals here or there.
Yeah, I think it's more useful the way you approach it than what I do. And, I've always been a reader of current events. Take lots of newspapers. Now I read everything from Newsbreak to everything that I can read every day in the world of what's going on in the world. I'm really up on all that, really up on it. Not that my ideas are any better than anybody else, probably worse. But regardless, it's important to me. Okay, what else?
All right. Well, I've kept you. I mean, this is the amount of time I told you I was going to keep you. So I try and be extremely respectful of people's time.
Oh, you've been gracious.
But right here at the end, I usually ask if somebody wanted to interact with you. Normally, I'm talking to people over the internet, and they're like personalities out in something. So they've got something to hawk, or they've got a podcast, they've got a YouTube channel or something like that. But if there was some way you wanted somebody to interact with you, what's your preferred method? If that is a thing, because I've had some people say, "Nah, don't call me, don't email me, I'm good."
I'm a people person.
Oh, I know you are.
and I love talking on the telephone. I love interacting on. I can't tell you, probably get 15 to 20 text messages a day from people, friends all over the place, and I interact with every one of them. I respond. I enjoy that kind of thing. I enjoy this kind of thing. I spent a good bit of time when I was mayor, doing a weekly broadcast. It wasn't by pod, but in the local TV channel on what's the status in the city, what's going on, what are you thinking about doing, where are you going. An interesting thing you might not know about me is that I like to think both out of the box and way out there. And sometimes that scares people. Good example. When I completed my term as mayor, now keep in mind I was mayor 80 to 84, a lot of years back. When I completed my term, the local newspaper asked me if I would write an op-ed about my experience and my recommendations and whatever. So I wrote a couple of them. One of the things I wrote was, we ought to develop a east bypass all the way around the city, way out there, and tie into North Texas Avenue up there where 2818 dead ends into 6. They're buying property for that now, but they said, what's the mayor smoking? That actually was in the newspaper. The next op-ed I wrote was, we should be a single community, not 2 cities.
Oh, Bryan,
not 2 school districts, not 2 fire departments, not 2 police departments. We should be and if you think about it, we could combine the county and the 2 cities into a metropolitan area and have a great deal more influence both in Austin and in Washington, D.C., because combined, we are much bigger and more influential. It's a mayor. So one of the comments came back in the newspaper, how would you even propose to do that? So I wrote the next op-ed. And it said, I'd start with the school districts. Neither one of the school boards nor superintendents of schools would I include in the discussion at the outset, because neither one of them wants to give up their spot. But here's what I'd do. I'd go to the university and say, would you do me an academic study through the Mays School of Business on the cost it is to duplicate the efforts that we have, just in the school district? Just give me the complete, I want graphs, and this is what I wrote in this op-ed. And when we see what it costs this community, I don't think we would have to have a campaign. I think there would be a campaign to have it done. I wouldn't have to initiate it to combine.
Right.
I said, now the same would be true once you did that with the cities, with the school districts, then you could begin to talk about the same thing with the 2 cities. There's always been a competition between both. But when I was mayor, I was interested in combining as much stuff as I could. That's how we got the chamber to move from downtown Bryan to College Station. I asked a guy to take over that project, and I wanted to move it out mid between Bryan and College Station, so it wasn't just a Bryan Chamber of Commerce. So my point is that I like to think out there. What are you going to do 20 years from now? What are you going to do I initiated probably had the finest group of people, city leaders, men and women, ever assembled for a project. And I asked them to give me a 25-year plan. And I wanted it very comprehensive. And I want you to do that within the next year. And when they got it finished, a beautiful plan, it went on the shelf at the city offices. And every time I'd turn around, I'd complain about, when are we going to take that off the shelf? What's going to happen with that? These accomplished people did that. Well, little by little, it's coming together. But not because we took that off the shelf and planned it out of that. It just naturally fell that way. Anyway, I don't know how I got off on all that.
That's cool. Well, again, we're running over time, but you became mayor. You sat on boards. You interacted with lots of different organizations. What part of your brain did that satisfy? Like doing the mayor thing and all that stuff?
Because I told you I wasn't a sleeper, so I'm thinking all the time. I'm the kind of guy that has a pad beside my bed, and I write down something I thought about that I want to explore a little bit more. I'm a good example. When the governor appointed me to Texas State University System Board of Regents, that's an 8-university system, and I became chairman of that board. The very first meeting, I looked out in the audience, and of course, when you have quarterly meetings of that Board of Regents, and there was a whole party of presidents of universities, media, interested department heads, and all that kind of stuff in the audience. And I said, well, one of the things that's important to me, guys, because of my own personal experiences, is that I want us to have a certified and active veterans office in every university, every one of the 8 universities. How many of you have that? Not a single hand went up. I said, good. That's exactly what I expected. Let me just tell you that the next time we meet, which will be 3 months from now, I'd like to see that you've established an office for veterans. And the reason I want that is that I want us to take advantage of these guys that have served this country and who now are trying to find a way to make a living and or go to school or do something. I want them to feel like you have their interest at heart and you'll put them, I want them to be in your programs. I want you to hire them. I want you to get them. They may not have the credentials to go to college, but let me tell you about me. I didn't either. And I got in. And I was pretty successful. I want to do that for them. That's again, you ask about, does that satisfy you to think through that kind of stuff? Yeah.
So in essence, your brain is always running.
Always, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Always.
And you think, what if I had this position, I could do these things. I could do this and I could do this. And then you get there and then you're like, all right, what's the next rung up? And so it's just, and I've noticed, because I've told my wife this and she's like, well, that's not how I work. So I want to win. I always want to win. So in work, I've always, again, like I told you, I've always worked a little bit harder. So I would get certifications. Everybody else was sitting on their hands. And so I would work and I would work and I would get this and I would get that. And I was always competing quietly. They didn't realize I was competing with them, but I was always, and it's the same thing
that sounds
occupationally
so
now. Like that's what I do. I go and I talk to large groups of people and I try and either enable them or show them a thing, but I always want to win. And for me to really win, sometimes I have to have somebody that's combative. I want them to be upset or on the opposite end, and I want to win them over. Like at the end of this, you're going to thank me. You're mad at me now, but you're going to thank, and it's like, I love that. I love to win. And that spirit I see in you for sure. And I think some people take it to the wrong area. Like we play with some people in pickleball that they get so mad that they're not going to talk to anybody for the next hour. But for me, I use it in a positive light. I think remember, nothing is intrinsically bad. It's how you use it. Like even I read a book on anger, and it said, because I used to think having anger was really bad, right? That comes from being a child and seeing people not being able to control their emotions. But it said, what it does is it gives you, one, it's your body telling you something's wrong and you don't like it. And two, it gives you the energy to change that.
Yeah.
And so like, I looked at that. I looked at most things in a very different light. It's like, these are all just tools I can use in very different ways, right? And so the competition, it's the same thing. I use it to better myself, but along the way, I bring everybody with me, right? I'm scooping my arms around everybody. I'm lifting them up. I'm helping them. I'm encouraging. So I try and use it for positive. So I'm a very big advocate of your competitive spirit, the control freak thing. I'm a recovering control freak. So I've very much learned to kind of let that go, but I see the positives that it's brought in your life and given you tools to help others around you, to help others in a way you would never ask for help, which is also interesting because I've also heard Brene Brown, she's brilliant. She's written a lot of books, but one thing she says is, if you have a friend and that friend asks you for help, you'd help them, right? Hands down. Part of being a good friend is also being able to allowing yourself to ask that other person for help, which is so hard. Like for me, that is so hard to do, right?
I just can't even imagine it.
Right? But you do it with baby steps, right? You don't do it all at once. You don't boil the ocean. It's like little bites. And if it's not something you think would bring more joy to your life or increase your happiness, it's okay. But it doesn't matter how old you are or where you are in your station in life. You can always do a little better, be a little better.
Yeah.
Yeah, for you, I'd love to.
One of the things that is important to me too, Greg, is, and you don't control this. You're not in control of this on the one hand. On the other, you could do things to dissuade it. But I look at my situation today and I say to myself, and it's true, that I know of, I do not have any enemies. And I don't want any. I don't want any. Now, do I get upset with somebody or do they get upset with me, something I said or whatever, But that's over with immediately. It's real important to me to be friends with everybody. It's important for me to feel like everybody likes me. Now, do they? No. I'm no fool. But for me, it's important to make me do everything that causes them to like me.
Do you think that you do that sometimes to your detriment as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
I will take the lesser road